Chapter 7 The Worst Friend Ever. I sucked in a breath as I ran, but it felt like I hardly got any. "Get back here, you pathetic criminal!" A high, squeaky voice. "Pete?" I dashed through the woods, everything a blur. Every muscle in my body threatened to explode. What had I done? Though my feet were quiet, they weren't very fast. The plague had really slowed them, and every other muscle in my body over the years. Not to mention all the traveling I'd done in the last 24 hours. The other supply hunters would catch up to me soon enough. I glanced back. Couldn't see the boys' black shapes, but their frenzied shouts filled the night. I might have been a good distance ahead, but where in the history of Middleton could I go? The trickle of the brook dripped into my ears, and with it an idea. I dropped my knees to the ground, felt around until I found a decent-sized rock, tossed it into the stream, then slipped behind a tree on the outskirts of the brook. "Quick!" someone shouted. "Into the stream! I just heard a splash!" The boys careened past me and jumped into the brook, making much louder splashes. When their footsteps faded on the opposite side of the stream, I let out a long breath and sagged against the tree. That had been close. Way too close. I slunk back toward the cul-de-sac. As I snuck along the perimeter of other factions' houses' backyards, everything was quiet except my heart, which still thundered in my chest. I blew it. I blew it big time. The only time I ever left the faction house at night, I got caught. Marv, too. The other faction members must have caught him when he came back from the forest, and then put our room's blinds down to make it seem like Marv was asleep, not realizing Marv never lowered them. Poor Marv. My whole body ached, not just from terror, running, and the plague, but from Marv. He'd done me a favor, and now I'd destroyed his life. All he'd ever wanted was his faction's respect, to get prestige points and have his name scribbled on our faction's flag in the park. And now he'd never have the chance to achieve any of those. He'd never let me live this down. I was the worst friend in the history of Middleton. Not to mention I'd destroyed my own life too. The whole town would be looking for me now, and it wasn't like I could leave Middleton, not with all the savage tribes out there that killed and ate kids who wandered into their territories. I put a hand in my pocket and curled my shaking fingers around the gold necklace. At least I had my most priceless VO. Just its light, slightly cold touch against my skin made heat radiate throughout my body. I made it to the street my faction house's cul-de-sac branched off from. A tall patrol officer walked along the middle of the road. He carried a torch and wore a blue police uniform. Like most clothes from the old world, it was wrinkled and riddled with holes. Not to mention a bit baggy because it was a little big for him. But the arms that poked from the sleeves were knotted with muscle. The black handle of his handgun poked out of the holster on his waist. Though the patrol officers were the only kids allowed to have guns and batons, I'd bet some of the ruler's servants did too. Interesting how the officers had torches instead of flashlights, but it made sense since using a flashlight all night to patrol the streets would be such a massive waste of batteries. The meager glow of the officer's torch lit only a few feet in any direction of the cracked, weed-infested street, including his grim, focused expression. Maybe I could have snuck along the streets to the manor after all. Not like that mattered now. There was only one place I could go. I stuck to the forest and wound my way along the roads, which were mostly narrow, but grew wider the closer I got to Route 240. I evaded every patrol officer with my quiet feet. I headed along Route 240 toward the desolate center of Middleton. There'd be lots of places I could hide for the night, since Middleton was a pretty big town, a small city really, and everybody lived in the suburbs. Probably because it was a closer trip to the mansion to transport VOs. But a layer of ice coated both my body and internal organs. I was done for. Finished. No matter where I'd hide, I'd either starve to death or the patrol would find me before long. Those were the only two possible outcomes I had now.